This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is legendary rock journalist Steve Rosen. He has finally released his long-awaited book about the friendship he shared with the late iconic guitar player Edward Van Halen. Now in its third printing, the book is titled Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen, and chronicles the writer's remarkable relationship beginning in 1977 before the release of Van Halen's first album and continuing through 2003. Rosen, who has previously authored 7 other books, including biographies on Jeff Beck, Free, Bad Company, Black Sabbath, and Randy Rhoads, writes about what it was like being friends with the greatest guitar player in the world. Welcome, Steve. It's so great to have you on.
Good morning, Catherine. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So you really have such an amazing story. I mean, I myself have listened to a lot of the interviews you've done, looked through the book. It's just really jam-packed full of so many stories. Growing up, did you ever think that you could be a writer?
You know, that's a wonderful question. I always loved the written word. I can remember being in 3rd grade where you're learning to write the alphabet. And I can remember, I have these memories of that, of, taking the pencil and learning how to make the capital P and the L and the curly Qs. And there was something about that I loved doing. And when I sort of understood, I can remember the moment when I could actually, read, simple little books. And I loved that as well. There was just something that, something fired in my brain that said, hey, this is cool, words and writing, and this fills something in you, little Stevie Rosen. So, I mean, whether it started there, I don't really know. I can tell you that I've always been a really voracious reader. I was always reading books. I was reading music magazines. In high school, I had a little music column where I would go out to clubs and review shows, and I loved doing that. I loved that whole process of, walking into a club with my little pad and taking notes and having people look at you and going, thinking, what is he doing? Why is he writing that stuff, And I loved all that stuff. So, I mean, did I think I could be a writer? I mean, maybe I did. I didn't know if I would ever be a good writer or a published writer or a successful writer. I mean, I don't think anybody can really, foresee that. But I always loved writing. I always loved words. I would read other writers and think, oh, my God, how amazing these people are. I wonder if I could do that. So maybe on some level, I thought I could be a writer. Really, what I wanted to be was a songwriter and guitar player in a band. That's really what I did from an early age. That was a tough one. I could never quite figure out how to, find like-minded musicians and find co-songwriters. So that was a difficult one. So along the way, I didn't fall into it because I pursued it, but I became a music journalist. And I really saw that as a way to open the doors to what I thought could have been a music career. So every day I'm interviewing these unbelievably gifted musicians, and I'm hanging out at the record company offices, and I'm meeting management and A&R people and publicists. And I'm thinking, well, these people know me. So when I bring in a tape of my music, they're going to listen to it and go, wow, this is great. We want to sign you. We want to hear your band. Unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. But along the way, I was able to kind of carve out a pretty remarkable career in journalism that really lasted kind of 5 decades. I mean, I really began sort of in late 1972, and it existed up until about 4 or 5 years ago when I just sort of voluntarily retired. I had sort of written all the stories I wanted to write. And it was at that point when I really sat down and thought, you know what, maybe now is the time to rethink my book on my friendship with Edward Van Halen. So, yeah, that's That's a long story about how I sort of
Well, it's an interesting
became a
story.
music girl.
When you mentioned a lot there. So when do you remember going back and starting, being a guitar player yourself, or did you pick that up in grammar school, or was that something more of a high school thing?
I suppose I was about 12 or 13, 14. My dad was a musician, not a professional one, but he was extraordinarily gifted. My dad could play keyboards, and he was self-taught, and he could basically pick up any instrument. He could pick up a flute or an oboe or a French horn, and within 10 minutes, I mean, he had it figured out. Not that he could play fluently, but he could play you melodies on it. I mean, he was extremely gifted. And I suppose being around my dad, who was always playing records, my dad was into the classical music. So I was always hearing, Debussy and Ravel and Prokofiev. He liked the more modern composers. So being around that, maybe that rubbed off. I had buddies who were starting to learn guitar. And so I remember my parents kind of renting me my first little guitar. And I was listening to records. I had my little portable record player, and I was playing singles and listening to the Seeds and Lovin' Spoonful. I remember the Monkees. I loved their music. And, you just sort of get together with friends and you jam and you put together bands. And I just loved every moment of kind of learning the guitar and learning new chords and, learning how to play the solo on Pushing Too Hard and, some new chord sequence. And I just loved all that. And I just, kept playing and had bands through high school. And pretty much it was cover bands, but I was sort of writing songs pretty early on. The problem was nobody else was writing original stuff. And so I tried to find people and say, hey, man, I've got these ideas. And what do you think, and what kind of guitar ideas would you bring in? And they were at kind of a loss. So I could never find that missing part. I wasn't a singer. So I always had to look for singers, and I was always looking for singers who were writers. And that was a tough one. And so, the original music thing got a little bit bigger, and I met some pretty good musicians. And I met some people who booked us into clubs, and I was doing a lot of the booking myself. And, we were playing clubs, locally around Southern California. There was a club called Club 88, Blind Pig. I got us into the Troubadour, the famous Troubadour, where everybody from Elton John to, James Taylor had played.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, that was amazing. I'll tell you, playing on that stage, I mean, I was terrified. And, I had a bunch of friends there that night, and we played well. But there was, I suppose we were missing something, and I don't know what that was. I mean, we were drawing more and more people, and I was trying to write, but I really still believed I was missing that one part, that co-writer who could bring in kind of a different voice. And again, it was growing slowly, and I worked with my buddy Jimmy Waldo. Jimmy was he was the keyboard player in a band called New England, who had a pretty big hit sort of back in the early 80s. He became the co-founder of a band called Alcatraz.
Was sure. Working with, I know them.
Right? Yeah, was working with Steve Vai and, Yngwie Malmsteen and then Steve Vai. And he and I have been friends, still are friends to this day. And so he and I wrote a lot of songs. And I would bring in sort of people that I had interviewed to come in and kind of play guitar, play solos. And sing stuff. And I mean, I had these amazing players. Tracy G came in to play a solo. Tracy G played with Dio. I had Rowan Robertson, who played with Dio, come in and play a solo. Harry Cody, an amazing guitar player who was in a band called Shotgun Messiah. Just a bunch of incredible musicians, and these were what I thought were really good songs. They were kind of like 80s kind of melodic rock, somewhere between, I don't know, maybe a little harder edged Tom Petty meets Peter Frampton. But I thought they were good songs. And so this was back in the day, way pre-computer internet downloads, so I would have cassette copies made, and I would just send cassettes out to every single person that I could think of, managers and publicists and musicians and publishers, music publishers. And I would get responses like, yeah, good songs, but we need to hear more. Yeah, really good songs, but what other songs do you have? So it was like this carrot that was forever being dangled in front of me, like, hey, you know what you're doing is good, but it's not quite good enough. And so write some more songs and record some more music. And so I kept pursuing that for the longest time, and I could just never quite get the dots to connect. Where a publisher would say, hey, we're going to take your song and we're going to, present it to Heart or Pat Benatar or, Journey, whatever. I could just never get that big door to swing open. And so, as hard as I tried, I could just never quite figure that out. Along the way, I was still writing and doing the music journalism thing, but really, my heart, was really kind of set on being a songwriter in a rock and roll band, playing guitar, maybe going on the road and opening for some bands. Could never quite get that to happen. I did a project, again, with my buddy Jimmy Waldo called Spirit Nation. And that was sort of, somebody described it in one of the reviews as world music meets Pink Floyd. And that's really exactly what it was. So it was, we found this singer, Judy Crescenzo, who was Native American. I think she was half Lakota. And so we were writing this music that was really ambient, and Jimmy was using mellotron sounds and these whirling keyboards, and the drum grooves were, very cool, sort of organic, but with, very kind of modern beats kind of overlaid. I thought this stuff was amazing. And so Judy would come in and sing these melodies that I'd written in Lakota. And I thought it was just so unique. I thought it was so cool. And we got a deal on V2 Records. That was Richard Branson's label. And the record was doing extremely well. We sold like 25,000 copies of our first CD. And for that type of music, that was a lot of CDs. And for about 2 weeks there before he hit, we were outselling Moby. On week 3, Moby started selling, but for a little while there, we were really doing great. And then it's that old story, well, the A&R guy who signs you gets fired. So our main contact there is let go. We make a second record with a different singer because Judy's husband wouldn't allow her to do another record. And it becomes this personal thing, blah, blah, blah. So we found this other singer, also a very good singer. And we did a second record, and we had that released on a label called Four Winds, which released that kind of music, world music. And it was doing well. But, there was no real promotion or marketing. And that sort of, ran its course. So, I did do those 2 projects. I had some songs that were used by Apple for some of their online promotional gigs. I had some music that was sort of picked up like in these B independent movies. Had some songs cut by a band called Cold Sweat. Had a song cut, a band called Autograph, who actually went out and toured with Van Halen on one of their early tours. So along the way, there were these little successes, but again, I could never figure out how to make a living at it. I think I was close, but just couldn't quite get that to work. So
with those 2 albums that you mentioned, I find that fascinating, especially the first one with the American Indian. What was the name of those records, or what was the name of the band that were signed under those labels?
Well, that's a good question. So the first one was just called Spirit Nation, and there really was no band. And that may have been part of the problem. So, well, how do you promote it? Well, you take out ads, right? This is in the day of radio or magazines. But with no band, it's like, well, we can't put it, they couldn't put anything on the road. Certainly a band could have been put together if it came to that. And I insisted on playing guitars on the road, even though I wasn't a great guitar player, I was a good guitar player. So there was no real band. Really, it was Jimmy playing all the keyboard parts. Jimmy, doing all the drum parts himself. We brought in some live flute players, some extraordinary flute players. And I think we brought in maybe some background singers, but Judy did all the vocals. And it wasn't really guitar-centric, but I played a couple of guitar parts on the first record. The second record was called Winter Moons. And it was sort of, similar to Spirit Nation. And this girl, Star, she was really interesting. She was half Jewish and half Native American, which I thought was an incredible mixture. And so there's actually a couple songs where she sings in Hebrew and in Native American. I thought, my God, no one has ever done this. And there was a little buzz about that. But again, there was no band. It was basically all Jimmy. And we brought in, again, some flute players. And so that might have been one of the problems. But, we were in all of the, sort of like the alternate places where they sell CDs. There's like all of these little bookshops and gift shops that exist. These little truck stops that you'll go in, and they'll have this little CD selection. And Four Winds got us into all of those. So we were selling, pretty well. And, we were making a little bit of money. We actually made some money on the V2 deal. I had sort of funded that record myself, to pay Judy, to pay the costs of recording, to pay flights for Jimmy and sort of his partner to fly to New York to meet the V2 guys. At the end of the day, I was paid back all of my money plus some. So we were making money. Had our A&R guy not gotten the boot or left, I can't remember, to be honest with you, and we had made that second record for V2, I think that may have opened that door to maybe doing some live stuff. Maybe they would have paid to do some tour support. Maybe I could have fulfilled my dream about playing guitar in a rock and roll band. I don't know. But I was really proud of those records, and you can still find them on Amazon and YouTube. They were really, really good records. I think they were really unique. There were other records out, world music records, sung in indigenous languages. But they were all more, what's the word? They were more organically driven. They were more sort of, and I don't want to characterize all Native American music this way, but they were more, acoustic instruments and just, Native American flutes and drums. They were less modern sounding, they were less ambient. I don't think there were ever keyboards on any of these records. So I really thought Spirit Nation was really unique in what we did. I wish I could have done more. I mean, I really do. I thought it had the potential.
That's a fascinating story, though. I mean, out of all the interviews I've listened to you, I haven't heard this story. So I'm so glad that you've shared it with us. You've done so much, Steve. I mean, not just writing the book about, Edde. You've written other books. Do you want to mention those books first before we dive into Eddie Van Halen?
I would love to. So back in, it's probably 1974, I had just begun writing for Guitar Player, which was always a dream of mine. I can remember before I started writing, I had seen some copies of Guitar Player. And your original question, Catherine, how or did I get into the music writing thing, or how did I become a writer? I can remember seeing an issue of Guitar Player, and it was in a library. In fact, it might have even been the school library, because libraries back then, would carry magazines. And I remember seeing this copy of Guitar Player magazine, and I remember reading the article. I remember this so clearly about Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers. And I remember reading this and thinking, wow, this is so cool. Can you imagine this guy sitting down in the same room with Dickie Betts, writing this story, talking to Dickie Betts, meeting Dickie Betts, shaking his hand, maybe going to a concert and seeing Dickie Betts play with the Allman Brothers. And I bet you he got free tickets to that concert, and all those things went through my mind. And on top of that, I remember thinking when I read the article, you know what? I could do this. I know as much about Dickie Betts as this guy did, and I could write an article like this. I really think I could do it. Let me back up just a bit. Previously, I had sent out letters to all these music magazines because I wanted to write for them. So I had sent letters to Rolling Stone and Guitar Player and Cream and Circus, all of these magazines that were around at the time, saying, hi, my name is Steve Rosen, and I'm a music writer, and I'd love to write for your magazine. I sent them some reviews I do. So I went to some shows that I bought tickets to and would send reviews. Well, it turns out that every place I sent reviews to, all those magazines I told you about, none of them ran live reviews. So I was so dumb, I didn't even do my research to know that Rolling Stone didn't run live concert reviews, nor did Guitar Player. But I got a little letter back from Guitar Player, which I have to this day, written by Jim Crockett, the editor, saying, good article, but we don't run live reviews. Let us know what else you're doing, or something like that. So I took that as, oh my God, he actually read it, kind of liked the writing. So fast forward about 2 or 3 years, that was probably around 71, right when I got out of high school, I started sending out these letters. So fast forward to 74, I ultimately got into Guitar Player. I sent them a story on Jeff Beck. That was the first story I ever sent to them. That became a cover. So the first story I sent to them becomes a cover. For the next 5 years, I was like Guitar Player's go-to guy. They just loved what I did, and I was able to interview all these amazing guitar players, Richie Blackmore, Frank Zappa, Ronnie Wood, John McLaughlin, Joe Walsh, just a plethora of extraordinary players. So 74, they send me a check for $25 telling me that they have this relationship with a Japanese magazine called Player, whereby they give Player permission to reprint articles that run in Guitar Player. Well, this was for my Jeff Beck story. So the very first story I write for Guitar Player gets picked up by this Japanese magazine. And I thought, well, you know what? Rather than receiving a $25 check from Guitar Player, I'm going to go straight to the source. So somehow I found their mailing address, and I wrote to them. Said, hi, I'm Steve Rosen, and you reprinted my Jeff Beck story from Guitar Player magazine, and I'd love to send stories to you directly. So they wrote back and said, yes, that would be great. So I started sending all of these stories I did for Guitar Player directly to Player, and they were printing them. Unbeknownst to me, that Guitar Player had this stipulation in a contract, which I never remember signing, saying that you can't reprint our stories elsewhere, you can't send them anywhere else. Anyway, I somehow avoided the question, or I circumvented that. So for many years, I was sending stories to Player while still having them printed in Guitar Player. And I say that all by introduction. By 77, I had been writing steadily for Player. They loved what I did. I had so many covers in their magazine. And they said, hey, why don't you write a book on Jeff Beck? And I go, I would love to write a book on Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck was, well, he's passed away now, but he was forever my favorite guitar player. I thought he was the greatest guitar player who ever lived.
Amazing.
There was nobody as great as Jeff. When they said, would you like to write a book on Jeff Beck? I thought, oh my God, that's fantastic. So I had interviewed Jeff a couple times by then. And so I reached out to his management and say, hi, I've been approached to write a book on Jeff. And, I would love Jeff's participation. Of course, I would love to write an authorized biography. I mean, that would have been a dream, of course. And so they would send letters back saying, yes, this is something we're going to think about, And so I kept waiting for them to kind of say, yes, let's do this. Jeff is on board. And I never got that response. So literally months went by and they kept saying, yes, we're interested, but Jeff is busy. And I thought, well, okay. So I just went ahead and wrote the book. And I pursued it in the same way that I would ultimately pursue, what are we talking about? About 8 years later, what was supposed to be the authorized biography on Edward Van Halen, which was I went out and interviewed all the people who sort of were in Jeff's orbit, vis-a-vis musicians he had played with, producers. I had already done a lot of those interviews. So Jeff had played with Carmine Appice and Vanilla Fudge. Carmine Appice and Tim Bogert, who were the rhythm section in Vanilla Fudge. I interviewed Stevie Wonder. Jeff played on a Stevie Wonder record. Stevie had written Superstition for Jeff and then took the song back and did it for himself before Jeff's version came out, which made Jeff very angry. Stanley Clarke, the iconic bass player. Max Middleton, who played keyboards on Jeff's first instrumental record, Blow by Blow, which is the greatest instrumental guitar record that has ever come out. John McLaughlin. Just a ton of amazingly heavy musicians. And so I had all these musicians, all these interviews, interviews with Jeff. And so I put this book together and I thought it came out really well. Sent the manuscript to Japan. They published it and it came out in 1978 as the Beck book. And I thought it was really good. However, they sent me copies and I opened the book up. And in the beginning, there are all of these photos of Jeff at his house in England with his cars and his guitars. And I go, what the hell is this? I had nothing to do with those photos. I didn't know what that was. I wrote to Player and they said, well, we had this Japanese photographer who went to Jeff's house and we just put all of that stuff in your book. And the Japanese would do stuff like that. Yeah. And they didn't think that it was insulting. I'm sure they believed that it was like they were honoring me somehow. I almost gagged. I was sick. The photos were beautiful, but there was all this text and I'm thinking, what the hell? And my first thought was, Jeff is going to see this and he is going to go insane. He's going to think I had something to do with it. And elsewhere in the book were like these weird ads that had like these weird drawings of like Jeff, like for these music stores. There were like some of these ads that looked like they were for like shoes. I mean, they were just the strangest things. So sure enough, Player sends me 25 copies. The first copy was, the first 3 copies had like these little gold embellishments. They were numbered 1, 2, and 3. I had tracked down Les Paul. Les Paul was Jeff's hero. I had tracked down Les Paul to write the intro to this book. And I thought, my God, Jeff is going to see that and he's going to flip. He's going to be blown away by that. So I had Les Paul write the intro. So the first book, number 1, went to Jeff. Book number 2 was mine. And book number 3 was for Jeff. So I send Jeff the book. I don't hear anything. And I go, oh my God, he is freaking pissed. I later heard through Robert Knight, who was Jeff's official photographer. He tells me, Jeff Beck freaking hates your guts. He thinks you're horrible. He cannot stand you. All because of this misunderstanding. I tried to rectify this by sending multiple letters to the management saying, I had nothing to do with that. I am as sickened by it as you are. I can only apologize. Fast forward to 1989, and I interviewed Jeff again. And I thought, I can't believe Jeff is allowing me to interview him. So I walk into the room and Jeff is there. The first thing I say to him is, my gosh, Jeff, I am so sorry for what happened. I had nothing to do with that. I can only apologize so many times. And he was pretty cold. He wasn't rude, but he was cold. The weird thing was we sat through this interview and the interview turned out to be amazing. So anyway, that's my Jeff Beck story. The book sold out all 5,000 copies, of which only came out in Japan in Japanese only. I've been thinking about revisiting the book and maybe having it released over here in English. So that was the first book I did. It's hard to remember.
That's a fascinating story, though. It really is. I mean, that is.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
I can't imagine how you were feeling. Like with the emotional roller coaster you must have been going through. Like just seeing it, like the feeling that they didn't even discuss it with you. It's like that's incredible.
It was horrible, and to have Jeff Beck say those things about you, and to sitting across from him and knowing how he was feeling inside, it was honestly, it almost made me nauseous. My hero, if I want to meet any one person in my life, Jeff Beck would have been the 2 or 3 people I would want to meet most of my life. John Steinbeck would have been the other one, and Eric Clapton would have been the other one who I never met. But Jeff Beck would have been one of the top 5 people in my life if I could have met, and just sit there and meet him. And after having met him twice, and we got along so incredibly well, and he was so open and cordial, and he really liked me. Honestly, I really believe he liked me beyond the journalism thing. And I went back to interview him a second day, the first time I met him, and I brought a guitar I had, and he's playing my guitar and saying how much he loved the guitar. My God, for a young journalist, I couldn't have written the script any better. Yes, so for him to have said those things was horrible. So that's 78. Fast forward to several more years, and I wrote a book on Free and Bad Company. I had been trying to get into Rolling Stone literally for years. I had met sort of their West Coast editor, Judy Sims, and their offices for Rolling Stone was literally 10 minutes from my house where I was living in the Hollywood Hills. They were over on Hollywood Boulevard. So somehow I would just go over there and hang out and just kind of ingratiated myself. And they had like a lot of back issues there, and I asked if I could have back issues, and so I would just show up and they never said anything. So I would pitch them ideas, and no. And I heard that Paul Rodgers had a new band coming out called Bad Company. I was a monster Free fan, and without ever having heard the Bad Company record, I knew it was going to be a huge record. They were going to be on Swan Song, which was Zeppelin's boutique label. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to be on Swan Song. They have the pedigree of Free, and the bass player was from King Crimson, and the guitar player was from Mott the Hoople. I go, this band is going to be huge. I knew the songs were going to be amazing. I pitched Bad Company to Judy, and sight unseen, she said, okay, without ever having heard the record, which Rolling Stone never did. So I interviewed them for Rolling Stone, all 4 people in the same room at the Continental Hyatt House, which is a famous hotel on Sunset Boulevard, the Continental Riot House, where all these English bands would stay and seriously trash the hotel rooms, for want of something better to do. So I'm there in the Continental Hyatt House with Paul Rodgers and Mick Ralphs and Boz and Simon Kirk, and I'm doing this interview, and these guys are amazing, and I'm drinking this all in. We get done with the interview, and I'm leaving, and I say to Paul Rodgers, I go, Paul, I have tickets tomorrow night for Elvis Presley at the Forum. Would you like to go? I knew that he was a monster Elvis fan. In fact, maybe his biggest influence. And without hesitating, he goes, Elvis Presley, oh my God, are you kidding? I would love to go. So the next day I go and I pick up Paul Rodgers at the Continental Hyatt House in my Triumph Herald. The Triumph Herald was like this offbeat Triumph that Triumph imported to America. They probably sold like 13 cars, and I had one of them. It was the ugliest, albeit most beautiful car you'd ever seen, and nobody knew what this car was besides Paul Rogers. So he walks out and he goes, "Oh my God, a Triumph Herald." He thought that was the greatest thing he'd ever seen.
That's great.
So we drive, right? We drive to the Forum, and we're sitting there, and he would be like me watching Jeff Beck. I mean, he was up off his seat and he's yelling and screaming. So all of these things come together. I did all these interviews with the band. I thought, I'm going to write a book about Free and Bad Company. And so I wrote the book, and it was amazing. Came out on an English publishing imprint called SAF Publishing. That did incredibly well. I then did books on Prince and Springsteen. I never interviewed Prince or Springsteen. I was approached to do those books. And honestly, I would never have done them because I had never interviewed them. And not that good books haven't been written, but I thought, how can you write a book on an artist when you've never interviewed them? There was just something about me that I just thought there was something wrong about that. But I was approached by an English publisher, Castle. Was it Castle Publishing? Yeah. And honestly, the amount of money they wanted to pay back in the day was pretty substantial, and they wanted 2 books, so I went ahead and did it. So I went out and I interviewed engineers and musicians, and I gathered some cool photos, and they were good books. They weren't great. I mean, they weren't as fulfilling or satisfying to me as the Beck or Free Bad Company books, but they were good books. I then wrote a book on Black Sabbath. I interviewed Ozzy many, many times. I had interviewed Geezer and Tony, Bill Ward, the drummer, and had all these amazing interviews. I got Ozzy to do an intro for the book, and I thought that was a really good Sabbath book. I thought that came out really well. I did a book on Randy Rhoads. I was approached by Andrew Klein. Andrew had taken lessons with Randy Rhoads. He loved Randy, and he wanted to do this book on his friend Randy Rhoads. So he approached me. He had sort of written the framework for the book, but it was really loose. So I basically took it and I fleshed it out, and I added interviews I had done, not with Randy. So I guess I went against my own thought process. I had never interviewed Randy, but I had interviewed, everybody else around him. So I did go ahead and put that book together. And again, I was actually happy with that book. Regrettably, the Rhoads family shut it down. They came after Andrew, even though Andrew is the most honest and straightforward person you'd ever want to meet. They came forward and they sued him, and they made life intolerable for him, and they made it impossible for him to sell his book. He basically sat on a warehouse full of these books for years. They ultimately all sold and are now kind of collector's items. You can find 1 or 2 copies on eBay for like $1,200, $1,500 on Amazon. It was this great oversized coffee book with these incredible photos. The graphics were beautiful. It was an amazing book, which never had a chance. So I did that book. I actually did a children's book, a short children's book for an English publisher, which I love doing. The history of rock and roll in 30 pages. That was amazing to do.
But most importantly, you wrote a book about Edward Van Halen. So let's hear about that.
My 8th book in 2020, I thought off and on about revisiting the book I was going to originally write on Edward back in 85. So just rewinding just a bit. In 1985, I'd been friends with Edward for about 7 years. I'd approached him and said, "Edward, look, man, writers are going to approach you. They're going to want to write about you. I'd like to be the person to write your life story." And he said, "Yes, of course. It couldn't be anybody else but you." And to hear him say that was, it was an amazing feeling. So for the next 2 or 3 years, again, I started gathering interviews, with people, his friends back in Pasadena where he had grown up, people who had promoted shows, musicians he had played with, managers, the band. I did interviews with Alex, Michael, and David. Put all these amazing interviews together. What was missing were the interviews with Edward. I interviewed Edward many times up to that point, but they were mainly interviews for music magazines. So the conversation was mainly guitar talk. I had done these other sort of unofficial interviews with him that were just conversations between the two of us. He had told me, record anything you want, anytime you want. So I would be talking late at night on the phone, or he would come over to my house literally at 2 or 3 in the morning, and we'd hang out, and I'd hit the record button, and we'd just talk, And those conversations were remarkable. They were personal, and they were about friendships and family. Fast forward 20 years. Our relationship ends in 2003. I don't want to give the book away, but the relationship changed and it just ended. It was tremendously sad. So 17 years later, I had thought about the book off and on, but essentially I'd put it out of my mind. But in 2003, I had some friends saying, hey, man, you should write that book. There's a book there. Why don't you write the book? In 2003, I thought more seriously about it. My first thought was, one, I can't write the book because I'm no longer friends with him. And people are going to think, oh, he's just writing the book. They're just cashing in or whatever. I could not stand that thought. I'm not wired that way. I didn't want that karma in my life. Secondly, I thought, I'm not capable of writing this book. I can't write a book that will measure up to the legend that was Edward Van Halen. If I'm going to write this book, it has to be as great. It has to be every great word in the world put on page to match who this person was, as a musician. Those are the kinds of thoughts that went through my head. So, I fought through those and I thought, okay, let me sit down and see what happens. So basically I sat down, not to write a book as much as let me just see if I can get some thoughts down on paper. So I sat down and I remember, thinking, let me just see if I can get a first sentence out. Because I was big on first sentences, and the great first sentences of books. And, Hunter Thompson's, so I was somewhere at a Barstow and I saw the bass and I thought, okay, this has to be something different. It has to be great. So I sat down and I wrote this first sentence, and it was a very long sentence. And I looked at it and I thought, you know what? This is pretty cool. There's something unique and original there. And I wrote another sentence and I kept writing. And a couple of weeks later, I had what would become the intro. And I looked at it and I said, this is good. This is something different. I've never read anything like this. I don't know how fans of Van Halen or readers in general will react, but this is good. And so I kind of followed my nose. I felt I had sort of found my voice as a writer. And for the next 14 months, I kept writing. 6 weeks after I began writing, Edward passes away on October 6th. I began writing on August 24th, and I probably specifically chose that day because it was my birthday. And 6 weeks later, he passes away. So I have a whole new mindset to contend with. Oh my God, he's passed away. What do I do now? Do I continue, and do people really think that I'm this, parasite, leeching off of my friendship or that history we had? What would Edward have thought? And I thought, you know what? I've written this intro. I think it's good. I'm going to continue. If the book never sees the light of day, and of course I wanted it to see the light of day, other people may write in a vacuum just for themselves. I wasn't that person. If I was going to sit there and take that time and that energy and that passion to write something, I wanted people to read it. So I kept writing. And, again, 14 months later, I'd finished in September of 2021. And I thought I had written a really good book. I was really happy with it. I didn't know how people were going to respond. It was extraordinarily honest, and it was insightful, and it was a deep dive, and it revealed things about Edward that nobody ever had written about or probably knew about. I also put myself there on the page and with all the warts and everything else, and that was hard to do. Looked around for an agent thinking, oh man, they're going to come out of the woodwork, not that it was me necessarily, but I thought, my God, somebody coming to them with a book about their 26-year relationship with this guy who is the most famous guitar player on the planet, they're going to want to be interested in it without ever having read anything. Not one agent, none of them even returned, initial emails. One agent said, "Oh, can I read an excerpt?" I sent him a couple of paragraphs and never heard back from him. So to say that was disheartening would be understatement. Reached out to my buddy Niels Lozauer, who was Van Halen's official photographer in the early days, took the greatest photos of Van Halen ever. Neil had published a lot of Van Halen photo books that were amazing, and he had some big publishers. So I reached out to him to say, "Hey, Neil, do you know any big publishers, any agents?" And Neil, who is sort of the loudest, most gruff, in-your-face individual you ever want to meet, but someone I had been friends with literally for decades, said to me, "Don't be an idiot. Don't be an agent. You're not going to make any money. No publisher is going to want to give you an in advance. Do it yourself." And I thought about it. Goes, you know what? He's right. So fast forward, I put the book out myself. I find an amazing printer. The book is beautiful. I was afraid that the book was going to look like a self-published book. And to me, sometimes you can look at a book and know it was self-published. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I wanted the book to be beautiful, and I wanted you to feel important when you were holding it in your hands. Sold out of the first edition, sold out of the second edition, did these wonderful podcasts along the way. Eddie Trunk from Sirius Radio, Ted Nugent, the Dave and Dave show, all these heavy Van Halen sites, which I love doing. I mean, I love doing this. I mean, who doesn't like to talk about himself, right?
But I have to give you credit, Steve, because you have really done a tremendous job on social media. You've actually shown footage of your book going into print, how the book was laid out. I mean, that's fascinating. I love that.
That's cool. I mean, I didn't know if I was being too self-indulgent and, like you, I mean, being a writer, Catherine, I mean, I look at that and I go, oh my gosh, that's what's involved. And look at these remarkable machines, and look at technology and the way the book is bound and the pages come together. And yes, there are still human beings touching these paper pages, To me, it was amazing, and I'd never seen anybody else do it. So I thought, hey, if nothing else, I'll be the first. So yes, in March 2nd, a couple weeks from now, the shipment is due in the port in Long Beach, which is about an hour north from me. And then those books will be put on a truck and brought to me in my condo in Lake Forest, California. And I will have copies of the third edition, and I am so psyched. I think the book is so beautiful. And again, Neil's photos are on the cover and the back cover. It's a color photo this time. I've added some photos on the inside and some graphics tweaks. I think the book is beautiful and fantastic.
It is beautiful. And, I wanted you to mention a story that I had heard you mention on a few interviews, but it was the first day that you had met Eddie, and it was kind of an interesting thing where he actually gave you his phone number. Could you share that?
I think about that day over and over, and I thought about it a lot, obviously, when I was writing the book, and I was trying to remember every little nook and cranny of that day. It is July in '77, and we're still 8 months away before the release of the first record. This Edward Van Halen individual, he is a mainstay in the Hollywood clubs, right? So he had been playing the Whiskey and the Starwood and Gazzarri's. And locally, I mean, he was a big shot. I mean, people in Hollywood knew him. He had played the Whiskey where I was that night to see Cheap Trick recording a live record. I was at the Whiskey a lot back in those mid-'70s days. I was on the mailing list for a lot of record companies, and those bands were always playing the Whiskey. I was always being invited, so I was there a lot. So I was there on a Friday night with my brother Mick to see Cheap Trick record a live record. I thought, that's worth seeing. So I'm downstairs waiting for Cheap Trick to come on, and there's a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Michelle Meyer. Michelle was the girl who booked the Whiskey. She also booked several clubs around town, Madame Wong's East and Madame Wong's West. Those were like two punk clubs. I had a band at the time called Deluge, and she had booked my band into both the clubs. She had never heard either band, but because she was such a good friend and kind of loved what I did being this guitar journalist, she booked them into the clubs. I loved her for that. I would have done anything for that. So she taps me on the shoulder and says, listen, there's somebody upstairs you need to meet. If there was somebody Michelle wanted me to meet, I was there. There was no questions asked. We walk up the stairs, and we walk into one of the Whiskey dressing rooms, which is like, the bottom of an ashtray. It reeks of cigarette smoke, and there's empty beer cups, and the walls are scrawled with graffiti. And, it reeked. But it was rock and roll, right? It's Sunset Strip rock and roll. So I look over in the corner, and there's this guy standing there smoking a cigarette, which is an image that would be etched into my brain, because every time I would see him, he would be holding a cigarette, regrettably now. But I'm pretty positive I recognized who this person was. This is the key point. I had never seen Van Halen play live, which was the oddest thing, because as I mentioned, I had been at the Whiskey so many times and the Starwood so many times, but I had somehow missed seeing Van Halen. I don't know how, but I'd probably seen pictures of him on flyers. Again, this is 77. It's not like there are any articles at all written about the band. In fact, there probably weren't. But somehow I believe I recognize him. So we walk over there, and she walks me over. And she says, Eddie Van Halen, Steve Rosen, Eddie Van Halen, Godhead. And when Michelle used the term Godhead, that was her vernacular for this extraordinary human being who went beyond the limits of mere mortals. I mean, this was like the apex for her, So we shake hands, and we're smoking, and he's smoking, and I don't know how the conversation started. So I would have said, hey, hello, how are you? Good to meet you. Probably I brought it up about, well, who do you listen to, And Edward would have said Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. And so, oh my God, for him to say that, I mean, Jeff Beck, as I mentioned, was my favorite guitar player. Eric Clapton with Cream was probably my second favorite guitar player. So, man, we just launched off into a conversation about Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. And he's telling me how much he loves Cream, and I tell him how much I love Cream. And, he's just making these comments, and I'm thinking, my God, this guy is unbelievable. I mean, he's saying like the same things I would say. I was sort of a snob about Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. I knew a lot about those guitar players. I knew every lick they played. I knew every song they played on. I knew their history. I mean, I knew Eric from, Blind Faith and a solo career in Cream, but I knew from the Yardbirds and all the blues bands he had, and John Mayall, and he had these blues bands before Mayall. I mean, I knew a lot about him. So if I was talking to somebody who said, yeah, man, I loved Eric Clapton, and they made a comment about Eric Clapton that was somehow below what I deemed,
I get it.
You know what I mean? Below my expectations, it's like, dude, you don't know anything. And they would be dismissed. Edward went the opposite way. He would talk about Eric's finger vibrato and the tone, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, he's going in a way that even I couldn't even describe this stuff. We talk about Deep Purple, I asked him about his band getting the deal. Everybody knew that Van Halen had scored a big deal on Warner Brothers. He goes, yeah, man, we got this deal. And, I think we made a good record. I hope it does okay. So I'm thinking to myself, this guy just scored this monster deal on Warner Brothers Records, and that's what he says about it. I'll tell you, man, if it was my band who scored a deal on Warner Brothers Records, I would have said, hey, oh my God, can you believe it? We're on Warner's. We're going to sell you a million records. That was not Edward Van Halen, and that was never Edward Van Halen. He had so much, his ego was so internalized. So we're talking, and again, the conversation was a half hour, could have been an hour. It was just one of those perfect conversations, no awkward silences. And we're getting done with the conversation, and he goes, hey, wait a minute, man. And he runs out of the room, and I'm thinking, wow, what's that about? And he comes back, and he's got a pencil or a pen, and he picks up some scrap, maybe a torn ticket stub off the floor. And he's writing this thing down. He hands it to me, and I look, and I see it's a phone number. He goes, yeah, man, that's my number. I still live at home with my parents. Call me, man. I'd like to talk to you again. So it was like just this unbelievable moment, If I fast forward 8 months, the record comes out. I hear the record. And again, to make this a quick story, I hear the record, and I didn't think it was very good. Every other person on the planet thinks it's the greatest guitar debut record from a rock and roll band since Jimi Hendrix. I didn't think it was very good. I listened to the next day more closely, and I agree with them. This record, this guitar player is changing everything. And we just became a friend, I believe, in that first conversation. And I would have loved to call the guy because, we had so much in common. And
you did.
I thought he was, yeah,
that's
I thought
amazing. I am so glad that you shared that story with us, because that is one of my favorite stories that I've heard you say in interviews. You probably could go on for another interview. It's just you're filled with information. Steve, it's been a pleasure to have you on. So could you just plug your social media so that everybody can contact you and get it all following you in the book?
Absolutely, Catherine. I'd love to do that. So you can pre-order the book now on my website, tonechaserbook.com. One word, very simple, tonechaserbook.com. And you can pre-order it there. And there's also a lot of other cool photos of me and rock and roll people and some cool little stories and videos. The book is not currently available on Amazon. As soon as I have the books, around the first week of March, you will be able to buy the books again on Amazon, on Reverb, and Etsy, if anybody goes to Etsy. eBay, Reverb, Amazon, and Etsy. Also, if you want to follow me or give me a shout, you can find me on my Facebook page, and I think it's tonechaserbook.com again, but if you just kind of type in Tone Chaser Steve Rosen on Facebook, you can find me. On Instagram, I am steve.rosen.guitar.pics. If any of you guys collect collectible guitar picks, I sell those on eBay. And man, so check it out, put in your pre-order. If you're a Van Halen fan, I think you'll love the book. And so thank you, Catherine, for having me.
Such a wonderful time. Yeah, such a wonderful time I'm having with you. And I don't want it to end, but we're going to roll out the show with Jamie's Crying by Van Halen. Thank you again, Steve.
Thank you.